The wedding morning smelled like money, control, and quiet cruelty, until a black waitress stepped out of line. In a luxury hotel parking lot, Naomi grabbed Richard's sleeve and begged him to stop. Her voice shook, her hands trembled. Security rushed in fast, not to listen, but to silence her. Guests stared like she didn't belong there at all. "Step back," someone shouted, loud enough to shame her in public. To Richard, she looked like trouble on the most important day of his life. What he didn't realize was this: ignoring her would destroy everything he thought he knew. Comment, and tell us where you're watching from. And subscribe for powerful stories that demand to be heard. Richard believed control came from preparation. His entire life and fortune had been built on trusting systems that looked clean, calm, and professional. On the morning of his wedding, everything around Richard Hale felt perfectly managed. Staff moved quietly. Security stood confident. Nothing appeared wrong, and that reassurance made him lower his guard. Across the same space, Naomi Carter moved through her shift the way she always did, present but overlooked. Years of working around wealth had taught her how to stay invisible while noticing details others missed. She wasn't suspicious by nature. She was careful. That caution came from experience. Her brother, Daniel Carter, had once trusted polished paperwork and confident promises. When the truth surfaced, the damage was already done, and no one with authority listened in time. Naomi never forgot how easily harm hid behind professionalism. Inside the hotel, the bride carried herself with effortless confidence. Evelyn Brooks was used to being believed without explanation. People adjusted around her instinctively. Nearby, Mark Brooks stayed mostly in the background, quiet but comfortable, watching without drawing attention. He didn't need to speak to feel in control. The environment rewarded silence. Questions were discouraged. Security reacted fast, but only when order felt threatened. Workers like Naomi were expected to keep things smooth, not interrupt moments meant for powerful people. Somewhere in that careful order, Lily Brooks existed only as a detail no one wanted discussed. Naomi felt the pattern shift before anyone else noticed. Systems didn't fail loudly. They failed when the wrong voice was ignored. Right before everything fell apart, Naomi felt it first in the small shifts no one else noticed. The way schedules tightened without explanation. The way access points closed earlier than planned. The way cars were repositioned twice, then a third time, each move precise and unnecessary. In spaces built on power, details didn't drift. They were directed. Naomi Carter kept working, kept watching, knowing that danger rarely announced itself until it was already sealed. Richard tried to stay focused on the day ahead. Calls came in waves. Congratulatory messages stacked up. Advisors moved him from one place to another with practiced ease. The calm felt earned, deserved. Yet a faint pressure followed him, the sense that something was being guided just out of his line of sight. Richard Hale noticed Naomi again near the service corridor, her attention fixed on the parking layout, her jaw tight with restraint. She saw a name appear where it didn't belong. A trunk checked twice, a phone call taken away from the cameras, then another. She caught a glimpse of Mark Brooks near the far end of the lot, comfortable where he stood, watching movement like it was inventory. He didn't rush. He didn't correct anyone. People adjusted around him without being asked. When Naomi approached security the first time, the response came fast and sharp. "Stay in your lane," a voice snapped, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. The dismissal wasn't subtle. It was designed. Naomi tried again. Lower voice, fewer words. She pointed out inconsistencies that didn't belong on a wedding morning. She mentioned timing, access, and the car that kept returning to the same spot. No one wrote anything down. No one asked follow-ups. Silence wrapped around her concerns, sealing them away. Inside, Evelyn Brooks moved through final preparations with smooth confidence. The room bent toward her. When she spoke, people listened. When she paused, people waited. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The certainty around her was inherited, reinforced, protected. Naomi watched Evelyn pass, polished and untouched by doubt, and felt the old memory press in, how damage once hid behind smiles and clean paperwork for Daniel Carter, how the right warnings had arrived too early for the wrong ears. Richard crossed paths with Naomi again near the elevators. Her urgency was controlled now, sharpened by being ignored. She tried to explain without alarming him, keeping her voice steady despite the stares. He heard her, but not enough. Weddings trained people to filter out disruption. "This isn't the time," Richard said, already turning away, convinced order mattered more than interruption. The tension thickened. Bystanders noticed something was off, then chose comfort over clarity. Phones stayed in pockets. Eyes slid away. The system did what it always did. It smoothed over friction by pushing it downward. Naomi watched Lily Brooks pass briefly through a side entrance, shielded by adults who spoke in lowered tones. The child looked small against the choreography of control, present but carefully kept out of focus. Mark's attention sharpened. He closed distance without appearing to move. His words landed quietly, meant only for Naomi. "You're creating a problem you don't want," he said, certainty wrapped in courtesy. Evelyn didn't look at Naomi when she intervened. Her gaze fixed forward, authority implied by posture alone. "We have this handled," she said, final and dismissive. That was when Naomi understood the shape of it. Not chaos design, not misunderstanding, management. Every instinct she had learned after Daniel's loss flared at once. The day wasn't spiraling. It was being guided toward a result that would leave no fingerprints. Richard felt the weight shift too late to ignore it. The quiet wasn't calm anymore. It was controlled. He watched security tighten positions and realized decisions were being made without him. Naomi stood alone at the edge of the lot, absorbing looks meant to shrink her back into place. She didn't retreat. She stepped closer, just enough to be heard, just enough to risk everything she had left. Her voice didn't shake this time. "If you trust me even a little, hide in the trunk and see the truth for yourself." The words hung there, heavy and irreversible. The day paused. And in that pause, the pattern locked into place, pulling Richard toward a choice that would either bury the truth or tear it open. The trunk closed with a soft, final sound that swallowed the last trace of air. Inside the darkness, Richard's breathing slowed, then steadied. The space was cramped, unforgiving, lined with carpet that smelled faintly of polish and metal. Every movement outside traveled through the frame like a signal. The car shifted, doors opened, footsteps passed close enough to vibrate the hinges. From inside the trunk, Richard Hale felt the day he trusted slipping out of his control. The engine turned. The car rolled forward. Sound narrowed into a tumult of tires and traffic, broken by muffled voices that felt too close to ignore. Laughter drifted in, casual and unguarded. A phone buzzed. Then the voices sharpened, familiar and unmistakable. Evelyn Brooks spoke with the ease of someone who had never needed to watch her words. The calm certainty that surrounded her earlier hadn't cracked. It had relaxed. The car stopped. Doors opened. Light spilled briefly through the seams, then vanished again. From the darkness, Richard heard a second voice join hers, lower and amused. Mark Brooks sounded unbothered, confident, the way people did when nothing threatened them. Their conversation moved quickly, efficiently, touching money, timing, and the last steps needed to disappear without consequence. Then a smaller sound cut through it all. Soft steps, a breath pulled too fast, a voice too young to hide its confusion. Lily Brooks appeared in that moment without being announced, her presence turning plans into proof. The child's questions landed with the weight of something real, something unscripted. The lie collapsed inward. What Richard had trusted as love revealed itself as structure, rehearsed and transactional. The car doors closed again. Silence returned, thicker now. Inside the trunk, Richard didn't move. He didn't need to. The truth had already done the damage. The pattern Naomi had tried to warn him about was no longer abstract. It was personal, undeniable, and sealed in the same space he occupied. Back at the hotel, the ceremony waited. Guest-filled rows. Cameras aligned. Music prepared to smooth over whatever came next. Naomi Carter stood near the edge of the lot, hands steady, eyes forward. She had nothing left to add. She had done the only thing the system never forgave. She had spoken when she wasn't supposed to. The memory of Daniel Carter pressed close, not as pain now, but as resolve. This time, the warning had landed where it mattered. When the car returned, the shift was immediate. Security tightened, then hesitated. Movement slowed. The air changed. Richard emerged without spectacle, his expression stripped of celebration and pretense. He walked past the people who had smiled at him all morning and didn't stop. The room felt it before anyone named it. Control was no longer where it had been. Inside the ballroom, Evelyn reached the aisle and finally sensed the difference. The certainty she carried wavered for the first time. Mark scanned the room, measuring exits instead of attention. Phones rose. Whispers traveled faster than the music. The day that had been choreographed to perfection began to fracture. Richard stopped at the center, eyes forward, voice steady. "I know who you are," he said. The words landed hard enough to ripple through the crowd. Evelyn's posture tightened. Mark's smile thinned. Authority that had protected them moments earlier faltered under the weight of being seen. Richard didn't explain. He didn't need to. The truth had already outrun them. Evelyn tried to regain control, her voice sharpened by urgency. "This is a misunderstanding," she said, reaching for calm that no longer belonged to her. It didn't work. The balance had tipped, but not yet completely. The room held its breath, waiting to see who would be believed. That was when the doors at the back opened, quiet and deliberate. Federal investigators moved in without haste, presence replacing speculation. Screens behind the altar lit up with timelines, transactions, and images pulled from places no one expected to be exposed today. The evidence spoke in clean lines and unarguable sequence. The truth didn't argue. It documented. Mark stepped back, confidence breaking into calculation. "You can't do this," he said, the certainty gone from his voice. One of the investigators answered without raising his tone. "We already have." The room shifted fully then. Security turned away from Naomi. Cameras pivoted. The authority that had dismissed her earlier now orbited around the proof she had pointed toward. Evelyn's composure collapsed in stages. First disbelief, then panic. Mark's control evaporated under the weight of record and witness. Richard turned once, eyes finding Naomi. "You were right," he said. The ceremony never reached its vows. What replaced it couldn't be undone. The truth had moved from hidden to recorded, from ignored to irreversible. And as the room absorbed what had just been exposed, one fact settled over everyone watching. Power had changed hands, and it wasn't going back. The fallout didn't wait for explanation. By nightfall, the wedding that had been built on secrecy was officially canceled, and the story moved faster than any attempt to contain it. Charges were filed. Accounts were frozen. The public record filled with details that could not be erased. Evelyn Brooks and Mark Brooks lost the protection they had relied on for years, replaced by investigations that followed clear evidence instead of polished appearances. What they had planned quietly was exposed loudly, and there was no path back to control. The consequences reached further than headlines. The scheme was traced, documented, and tied to patterns that could no longer be dismissed as coincidence. Federal investigators confirmed what had been denied for too long. This was not an isolated incident, but a deliberate abuse of access and trust. The system that once moved to silence warnings now moved to preserve proof. For Richard, the truth settled slowly and painfully. Richard Hale didn't leave untouched. He left changed. The man who had trusted order over instinct learned how easily structure could be used to hide harm. He spoke publicly only once, not to defend himself, but to acknowledge the warning he almost ignored and the voice he nearly dismissed. That admission mattered more than apologies. Naomi returned to work with her dignity intact and her role no longer questioned. Naomi Carter wasn't praised for being brave. She was respected for being right. Her warning became part of the official record, not an inconvenience pushed aside. For the first time, the system that had taught her to stay quiet adjusted around her instead. The loss that shaped her vigilance finally carried meaning beyond pain. Daniel Carter's story was no longer invisible. It was recognized as the reason this one ended differently. Even the smallest presence mattered. Lily Brooks was protected from further harm, no longer hidden behind adult decisions that put image above care. What had been treated as a detail was finally treated as a life. This wasn't a clean ending. It was a necessary one. No forgiveness was rushed. No lesson was softened. The truth stood where silence used to live. Stories like this don't ask for sympathy. They demand recognition. They remind us that injustice rarely announces itself and that warnings often come from voices society is trained to overlook. When someone speaks up and the system tells them to stay in their place, who do we choose to believe? And how many truths are we still ignoring because they don't come from the right voice? If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Like, comment, and subscribe to Black Community Struggles because these stories matter and silence never helps.